blood orange, Pina Colada Mead. Yeah, so today we're going to make a rather straightforward recipe. Something that's super easy, comes together with just a few ingredients, and if we balance it right, should be perfect. Now, what separates this mead from most of the meads I make is instead of using water and honey, we're going to use coconut water and honey. Now, just be warned before you even start this. You want to make sure you're using coconut water and real coconut water. The ingredients for this one, 100% coconut water. Perfect. Some of the cheaper ones might have fillers and such. You want to avoid that. And you don't want to use coconut milk. That's a whole different monster and will give you a completely different result than what we're doing today. Before we start though, I kind of just wanted to see something. You see, there's a lot of sugar in this water. And I don't want to make a crazy high gravity. And on its own, it's reading a 1.020. So yeah, there's definitely some sugars in here already. This is a smaller fermenter. It doesn't usually give me a full gallon. So for today's recipe, considering I'm going to have sugar in the pineapple, sugar in the coconut water, I'm going to use 1.5 pounds of honey, which I weighed this before we even started, so I know there's 1.5 pounds of honey in here, which also gives me a little bit of a benefit. Because now, I don't have to sit here and wait and glug honey into this fermenter. I could pre-mix it in the container and make my life a whole lot easier. Alright, we're good. So, I know I mentioned already that this makes a little bit less than a gallon. I want to also say that I would have used a bigger fermenter, but I have plans right now, or I'm using all of my big glass fermenters that have the wide mouth. And there's things going into this one, so trying to get them into a jug-shaped fermenter might be difficult. So I just went with a slightly smaller recipe. If it really becomes an issue, I'll just make a second smaller recipe, and we're all good. Now I want to add about 2 pounds of pineapple chunks. These were frozen bagged pineapple chunks that I defrosted. And get all that juice. And the last thing I want to incorporate, because this is a blood orange pina colada, is 3 blood orange worth of zest, peeled. Now, I'm going to save the fruit. I'm going to put it in a freezer bag after I cut it up, after I film this. And when we get ready for secondary, I'm going to add the fruit into secondary. You can sometimes get away with adding the fruit of an orange into primary. But with the pineapple, and the fact that honey also has an acidic nature to it, I was afraid this was going to be way too acidic and create a way weird pH type thing where it just wouldn't ferment. And there's ways around that, but the blood oranges, once I freeze them and then defrost them and put them into secondary, are going to give just as much blood orange characteristic and flavor as if I put them into primary. So we're not really hurting ourselves by doing it that way. And we're giving the brew a much better chance at fermenting clean on through. Now we're going to add a little bit more juice. And we want to give enough headroom that if this takes off, and when I say takes off, I mean sometimes you pitch your yeast and you don't really see a lot happen. but then you notice bubbles and stuff on the side, and the fermentation goes straight through. Sometimes they create a foamy nightmare mess, and it really just depends on what you're putting into your mead, what type of yeast you're using. There's a bunch of factors. I'm using Red Star Premier Cote, which is a good yeast. It's going to extract a lot of fruity esters from the pineapple. It's why I chose it. I want to be greedy, but I don't want to be so greedy that I have to clean this mess up in 2 days from now. So that should be a good amount of headroom. Now, let's clean up a little bit of room and talk about our adjuncts. Now, my adjuncts today, which are kind of optional ingredients, but I really recommend using them. I'm going to use a little pectic enzyme and a little Fermaid O. The pectic enzyme is going to help break down those pineapple chunks and get every bit of pineapple essence out of them that we possibly can. And the Fermaid O is going to be a yeast nutrient, which is going to help the yeast create a much stronger colony, work a little faster, work a little bit more efficiently, and really ensure that this brew just goes the way we want it to. You don't absolutely need to put a nutrient into your mead, but you're doing a disservice to your yeast by not. And at this point, since everything is mixed up and there's nothing else to add, before I give it its final stirs, I am lying. At this point, we're just going to give it a nice few good stirs. It should come together relatively easily because we already mixed the honey up in the water. We now want to take a reading and see what our initial gravity is going to be. It smells really good right now, as is, and probably a wonderful fruit punch. Maybe less honey, though, because it's going to be cloyingly sweet. All right, we're floating. And 1.100, so exactly what I was hoping for. That means if this goes dry, we're going to have around a 14 to 16% mead, which is typically the gravity range I like to brew my meads in. So no complaints there at all. It also means that this yeast can handle that much honey and gravity and eat through it relatively efficiently. Now, once the yeast is in, I like to give it one more really good stir. We're going to put on our lid and then an airlock. But before I grab the airlock, we are going to grab some notes. I personally like to put notes on painter's tape because it does not stain my glass fermenters and it comes right off when I need it to. Always label your brews. Just way too much stuff goes on and you're going to forget something somewhere. At least this way you know what the date was you started it, what the original gravity was, which brew it is, all critical information that you're going to need sooner rather than later. The only thing we have left to do now is let it go, let it ferment, let it do its thing. You're going to notice probably some foam on the top of it, some bubbles coming up the sides. That's the sign of a healthy colony of yeast working. And this airlock should create a positive pressure where this chamber closest to the extra line goes down and this chamber goes up. That's allowing the gases that are created during fermentation to leave without letting anything back into your brew. If you would just put a solid lid on this right now as is and let it ferment, it would explode. That's just how it works. There's a lot of pressure that gets built up in these fermenters during fermentation. So it needs a place to escape. But it's also a very delicate and fragile thing, fermentation. and other things could very much ruin it, such as mold, other microbes, which is why we sanitized everything before we even started, and why I put an airlock on top. But that's all I have for today. I'll see you guys in about 2 weeks when I'm racking this and doing our initial tasting. So until then, I'm Phil. This is Phil with Facts. And until next time, guys, cheers.